Hello and welcome to another session of Courageous Conversations. So today I'm being joined by Zeena Greene. We're having a conversation about code switching. Now, code switching is something that, like I imagine many white people out there, I never knew what it was because I haven't really had to experience it myself. But as I've kind of become more educated in the experiences of other people, I've realized just how big a thing code switching is. But truthfully, I still don't know much about this topic. So this will be a conversation where I may even be asking some simple questions, ignorant questions, because I just have never taken the time to really learn much about the subject. So anyways, thank you for coming on today, Zeena, and being willing to talk about this subject and even share some of your own experiences.
Yes, thank you for having me, John. I'm super excited to share some more about code switching because I feel like it's something that, takes place subconsciously a lot of times and people don't really think about the fact that they're doing it. And it's just something they do every day in little ways. So first, I just kind of wanted to define what is code switching.
Yeah,
So yeah. So code switching basically is broadly, it's either involves adjusting one's style of speech, appearance, behavior, or expression in a way to optimize the comfort of others, and usually in exchange for like fair treatment, quality of service, and employment opportunities. So anything about tweaking yourself to appear a certain way, sound a certain way, or be perceived a certain way by another individual or a group of people is code switching. And it's one of those things that can just happen and manifest in different ways. Usually it manifests like in your childhood, probably at school, trying to fit in. But there's different ways that it can come about. And so I wanted to highlight different ways that minorities, but even non-minorities might experience it. And some of those ways could be, changing the way you speak or dress around certain people. At school, it could be the child who is embarrassed to bring their lunch from home because of the kind of food or because of the spices, and it's just not a traditional American cuisine. Or it could even be a person who's constantly switching up their pronouns while they're telling a story so as not to reveal details about their partner or their sexual orientation. So it comes up in a lot of different ways. And one way, actually, because we had an internal conversation at my company, Lyra, where we discussed it. And someone named Julie, she brought out another great point when it has to do also with ageism. So like it could even be older people in the workplace who feel the need to look and act young, to fit in, to get favors of employment, to be treated fairly. So again, it's just something that can manifest in so many different ways.
that's interesting. The age thing, I think I've seen evidence of that, right? Where I work in a lot of tech companies where the demographic of most people working there is very young, and there are a lot of older people who feel like their value isn't recognized and their abilities aren't recognized, right? Their potential isn't recognized because they're just seen as old, out of touch. They kind of like people in the company kind of make a little small box around them of like, oh, Bill's here to do this, and this is what Bill can do, and they don't really see any potential outside of that, right? So I guess maybe one aspect of this is, you talked about code switching being changing behavior, et cetera, for other people's comfort. And I think part of it is it makes it easier for other people to see and recognize your potential and appreciate you and value you, right? When you're acting the way they like and expect people to act. I guess that's just another way to say what you just said, I guess.
That is another example, yes. Basically, just like you mentioned, trying to be perceived a certain way so as to fit in or be found in a favorable light. Because a lot of times I feel like, even for me, for example, just like as a woman of color, the way that I style my hair for work is it can be very important. And now I'm very blessed to work for a company like Lyra, where I can be more forward and outgoing and have like braids with colors, like on my LinkedIn profile pic. But in the past, like when I worked for accounts receivables and revenue cycle companies, where it was just a little bit more of an older demographic, but more traditional, the way that I dressed, the way that my hair was, it had to be a very particular way in order to fit in and be found in a favorable light. So, it's small things like that. And it just comes up, kind of basically when you're in situations where you feel like you're worried about how you're being perceived, or there's like a connotation here by this is how we act, this is how we look. We want you to do the same to fit in here. And it usually shows up that way.
So one thing I want to clarify, because I think I may have had the wrong idea coming into this as well, or I think I was torn on it. I'll get clarified. So this code switching, right, we usually hear in the context of people who are members of various marginalized groups, right, whether that's the LGBTQ community or racial minorities, whatever it is. However, it sounds like what code switching is kind of a universal experience where you change your behavior for the comfort of others, in exchange for access and, exchange for something. And anyone can experience that. It's just we happen to live in a culture that values whiteness, that normalizes whiteness. So typically white people don't have to do a lot of code switching. They typically can be 90% themselves and only, hold out maybe, a little bit that is unprofessional. Where for various members of marginalized groups, right, that are outside the, white demographic, the heteronormative demographic, then they have to code switch a lot more of themselves, right? They have to change a lot more of themselves. So it sounds like code switching is not something that is unique to marginalized groups, but it's experienced more strongly in marginalized groups than it is in someone, say, like myself. Is that right?
Absolutely, that's correct.
That's interesting. So why does it matter, right? If everyone goes through it, can't you just toughen up Buttercup and not talk about it? Like, why is code switching such a big deal? Why do we even talk about it?
Well, I'm glad you brought it up, because code switching, because it's a subconscious act and you don't really realize you're doing it, you are slowly eroding away at the ownership of your authentic self. If you step out the door of your home every day and you feel like you have to be another person than who you actually are just to get through the day, that for your own like mental health, emotional health is very draining. And then two, it just doesn't allow you to be true to yourself, which I think is what everyone wants. I think that's the human experience we all want. We want to be who we are. We want to be accepted for who we are, and, have the ability to walk into a room and not feel as though we have to change something to be accepted or to be a part of a conversation, or to just be realized and viewed and seen. So I feel like because it takes away from who you are and it's a subconscious act, it'll slowly like erode away your own emotional health, mental health, and it just takes away from your authenticity. So it's very important.
Interesting. So for any listeners out there who are still skeptics, right? The phrase eroding at your sense of self is still fairly abstract. Let's get specific here, right? Let's say you had one person who's put in an environment where they had to do lots and lots of code switching on a daily basis, and one person's put in an environment where they didn't have to at all. What are some real world outcomes we might expect on average to see between those different groups, right? What is the difference in their lived experiences between code switching and not code switching a lot?
Yeah, that's a good point. So basically, it's almost like it can become a double life in a sense. So if you're constantly being someone else, like at work, let's say, versus at home, and then you go through and you're like, okay, I have to make sure that I don't mention this and this because it'll bring out my partner, it'll bring out something about this, or I can't get my hair done this way because it's not going to be viewed as right in the office. So basically, you almost have like a double personality, two sides to yourself, and you're going through and you're having to portray a certain thing. Well, naturally, it's going against who you really are. So it's already wearing you down emotionally. It's wearing you down mentally to keep up with who you are around certain groups of people or in certain places. And it just slowly takes away from you feeling like you can be yourself. And when you get home, it just seems like a weight off my shoulders. Now I can just be, or when you're around your friends or when you're around your family, wherever you are in the place where you feel accepted and you stop doing that, you notice the difference. It's like a lift off your shoulders. Okay, I can be who I am. I can, I know these people. I know that they care about me, they accept me, or they at least respect me to the point that I can be exactly who I am. And it's such a deep contrast that it just takes away from, kind of like I mentioned, the ownership of yourself, but it also will eventually have you playing into like two different roles or characters. And I mean, that's just exhausting, So I think it's very important for people to be able to slowly break down that, practice, because it is subconscious. You don't really realize you're doing it, and it just builds up over time. And before you know it, you're like, wow, like, this is how I am at work, and this is how I am elsewhere, or this is how I am when I'm with this group of people, and this is how I am when I'm over here with family. And it just, it's like a playing a role constantly, and it just drains you.
Yeah. You mentioning that double life, right, thing you said reminded me of experience from my own background that I didn't have the language code switching for at the time, but I used to manage a Verizon store. One of my employees was Black. His first name was Lamar. His middle name was Larry. When he was so this was in West Virginia. So give you a little bit of context of the culture he was in. And when he was out on the sales floor, he was Larry, right? And most of the time when he was at work, he was Larry, right? And he definitely aligned himself with white culture, white expectations, white comfort, right? White preference as far as how we behaved. But out back on a smoke break or on a lunch break or even outside of work, right? He was Lamar and he acted differently, right? And like he actually had two different names for it. He called himself Lamar when he was outside of work and quote unquote acting Black, if that even means anything. And then he had a different name when he was in the store, Larry, when he was again quote unquote acting white, whatever that means. So that's very interesting. That so your insight on this was that, to us on the outside, we noticed the difference. And, it's not like there was any physical signs of fatigue for him when he was acting like Larry. In fact, we often just kind of knew him as Larry because that's, we saw him 90% of the time acting as Larry. But you're saying that was causing some mental, emotional exhaustion on his end, having to kind of switch roles when he walked into the store.
Yes, I believe so. Because when you're not, anytime that you're having to portray something else, it is like putting on a mask. So no matter how comfortable that mask might seem, you might be used to the mask, it's still a mask. And it will slowly have its own effect on you, whether that's just like emotionally exhausting, like, oh, I can't bring this up, I can't bring that up, or just mental exhaustion of switching back and forth between the roles. But it is like wearing a mask all the time.
So I'm going to take this a step further. And of course, here's where we get into the realm of just pure conjecture, right? There's no way to know for sure. But sales is a profession which requires a lot of emotional stamina to keep going. The difference in mood can have a huge difference in your outcome and your sales numbers, right? Anyone who's been in sales for any amount of time knows that. And Lamar, or I guess I knew him as Larry, so we'll call him Larry. Larry always had not the best numbers in our store, right? He always struggled with his numbers. Now, again, we can never know why that is. There's a million reasons someone can struggle with their numbers. But one reason I'd never considered before, which maybe I should have considered, is that it's possible the burden of code switching for him just put him in a position where most of his emotional energy, stamina, and reserves was just used up in existing. So he didn't have as much of that emotional energy and stamina and reserve to put towards his selling to always be 100% on the sales floor, like someone like myself did. Because for me, there wasn't really any difference. At home, John, and at work, John was the same person, which meant I had more emotional resources to put into my selling. Is that a likely scenario, right? Obviously, we can't know for sure, but is that how it can work sometimes?
I would say so. Like you said, we can't know for certain, but I would not be surprised if it does play a slight role into that. Because again, it's like putting on a mask. So it's like, okay, I'm this person, I'm doing this. And it is kind of reserving that emotional pool that you mentioned, and kind of just playing to certain things versus how when you have your full range and you're just being yourself, it's all flowing freely. So that's a very good point that I'd actually never thought about myself being in sales. Yeah.
So interesting. So if you don't mind sharing, can you talk to us about examples of times in your life, right, where you've caught yourself code switching, whether, at work, school, or elsewhere?
Absolutely. So for me, it did start in school. So I went to 6 different elementary schools and 3 different high schools. I'm in Texas, so all of these were in North Texas, and they were predominantly white. So there was always an altering of the way I spoke or acted around certain friends versus like my other friends, to kind of just not rock the boat, to fit in, to, like every kid wants to. And then that just kind of carried on into adulthood. And I definitely think in my past, working in like finances and accounts receivables, banking, pretty much everything finance. I did have to look a certain way. So not wearing my natural hair, or not wearing braid styles or other things that I like to do now, because, in those workplaces, those hairstyles were viewed as not professional, even though in reality, that's just my hair, or that's just the way I style my hair. So having to change that and having to change the way I dress a certain way. I remember working for a bank that was very traditional, kind of old timey, and they wanted you to wear like a dress or a skirt, and you had to wear stockings or leggings or, something on your legs. So, even doing that, like for certain roles, just again, to be perceived as professional, to be perceived as, a valued member of the team. And so I'm very grateful now where I am with Lyra that I don't have to do any of that because my contributions are valued and they're seen, and they really do like put so much value into having everyone be true to themselves and bring their authentic selves to work. And it's like something tangible. You can feel it, it's in the conversation, but it's also in the reality of our work. And I'm very grateful to be with a company like that.
Yeah. Yeah, really. Have you noticed any difference in your experience working, being at, more traditional bank versus being at Lyra? Like,
Oh,
is there any
absolutely.
difference in your output and the quality of your work or anything like that?
That's a good question. Now, they were two different industries, so I will say it's kind of hard to measure, but I
Sure.
do feel that the difference is that it's not like wearing a mask. It's not like carrying this burden of having to worry about how I'm perceived to my manager, to my team, or to the customers or clients I'm interacting with. I don't feel as though like, even though obviously wherever you are, you represent your company. So like when you walk into the bank and you're working at the bank, you are representing the bank. And, when I'm working with Lyra, I'm representing Lyra, but it doesn't feel as though I have just this like uncomfortable mask on the whole time. It's like, yeah, I'm representing Lyra and I'm free to be myself. So I've definitely noticed a difference in like specifically my interactions with management, my interactions with my team, because there's a level of respect and acceptance that I have here that I don't think I experienced in those other roles at all. Yeah.
It's interesting. I had, again, never thought it was the same thing, but it seems like maybe they're at least similar. I think I've experienced a similar phenomenon to code switching in the past, not the same thing. And when I was most recently job hunting, like the number one criteria I use for picking a company is somewhere I wouldn't have to do that, right? Again, I didn't use the language code switching, but I found that just the way I go about handling myself in a professional setting, the way I overcome challenges, the way I achieve goals, it's just very different than the way most people do, right? And I found that in the wrong organizations, that can be off-putting to leadership and to peers, and it can cause tension, and it's a headache for me, it's a headache for my manager. It's just not a good situation, right? Where in other companies, they see the way I operate and they go, oh my God, amazing, that's exactly what we need, more of that, please, thank you. And I was looking for that second type of organization, and I worded it, how did I word it? Because I was talking to someone about this. Some of the effect of, I want to be, I've been in environments in the past where because my style wasn't valued, wasn't a good fit, I had to spend more energy thinking about, worrying about, managing, controlling the relationships, the politics, those dynamics, how I was perceived. I actually spent more energy on that than I spent on like actually doing the job. Right? Like these meta tasks of like, managing my communication and my perception and my relationship with my manager and all these meta tasks were actually taking up more effort and energy than just doing the freaking work. And I didn't want that. I wanted to be an environment where I had to put like 1% of my energy to worrying about how I'm being perceived, right? And 99% of my energy into actually doing the work.
Yep, absolutely.
Huh.
That's very relatable because it is like a balancing act, like you mentioned. There's so many, I think I lost the word, but it's like the way you're interacting, there's so many different like micro societies within, the workplace or within school or wherever you are. And so it is constantly like a switch, a balancing act, a way to keep like plates spinning, constantly. So I can relate and agree with that. Yep.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And I would say too, like another way that I almost forgot to mention that it's like shown up in my life is in my home space. So when I was 23, I moved out of the house with my family and I've got roommates. So I'm trying to think, now I'm 26. So I've been to several places, had several different roommates. In my first place, I was living with a lot of people from around the world. Like we had a Ghanaian man there who was born in Russia, but he was Ghanaian. That was my landlord. We had another Black guy from St. Louis, so he was a roommate. And then I think we had a Pacific Islander come through. So we just had people from everywhere. And it was like an environment where I definitely felt like I could be myself. I was understood there. And then like I moved from there to East Dallas with like two other guys. And I moved there, and I think, let's see, one's white, one's Hispanic. Both are a part of the LGBTQ community. So it was nice to have that. But at the same time, like I didn't feel that I could, be the same way around them. Like if I was on the phone with family, I might not use slang or certain vernacular, or like when it came to shows, like TV shows, like I'd probably just watch my favorite stuff, my guilty pleasures in my room versus like going downstairs and having them out with everyone else in the living room. So it was a little bit different. And then now I just moved like back to Irving, and I have like 3 roommates here. And it's different. It's like they're in their 20s. They're all white. And I think there's one gentleman who's here who's white in his 40s. But even here, I feel like a lot more free than I did where I was just at. So I will say, yeah, there's something to it as well. Like for people who are with roommates or with other people from different backgrounds, sometimes at home you feel like you have to change like the way you're speaking on the phone or the way you're doing things, just because of the way they're perceived as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. Tyrone just left a comment in there saying that, we're often taught to devalue our culture. And that's something that I've started to see, this notion of professionalism we were all raised with, right, is almost being something different. We call it professionalism, but isn't it just some strain of white supremacy where it's about white is the normal, right? And if it's not white, it is abnormal, it's different, it's unique, keep that out of here. Something that values the attributes of white people, right? And devalues the attributes of people of other ethnic groups. Something that prioritizes making sure that the white people in an office environment are comfortable, right? That's what all this professionalism is about. And it goes outside of race, right? You can even talk about tattoos and stuff, right? And colored hair. It's not just a race thing, but a lot of it is about how do we make white people comfortable? How do we value what white people bring to the table? And how do we make sure that white people have what they need to succeed? And to hell with any other people groups. And again, when I say white people, it's like straight, straight white people, it's middle-class white people, it's able-bodied white people. I mean, like all these kind of things come together, right? Again, it's not just race, but it's about how do we just make like the most, average person, right, comfortable, and to hell with anyone who doesn't fit nice and neatly in that little box, right?
Yes, exactly.
And I wonder about like, where did that come from? Why did that exist, right? Because I don't know of anyone who fits perfectly inside that average box. Most of us have some aspect of our identity which falls outside that we have to cloak and hold and hide in the work environment. So almost all of us are suffering to some extent because of this professionalism, right, culture. Who came up with it, right? I'm curious now, where the hell did this come from? Because it's not serving anybody,
And I feel like, you're absolutely right. I agree with everything you said. I feel like it comes from a European society standard that it was brought over here when, we were building America. And I just feel like it's something that is built into the recesses of our history. And it's something that we don't really talk about, but everybody to an extent have experienced and they know about it. And, that's why I feel like it's important to take topics like that are kind of built into our history, but not really addressed, even though everyone kind of can feel and know that it's there and, that it affects them in some kind of way. It's important to take those things and bring them to the light and then ask the questions like you did. Why is this here? It doesn't fit the majority of people in our day and age. Why do we have this standard? What can we do about it? So, I could totally agree with that.
Yeah. It's almost like, and again, this is definitely, getting out there in the world of conjecture, right? I'm not a historian, but I imagine a lot of this notion of professionalism probably came about in the 20th century when the modern office building and workplace came to be, right? I don't know how much professionalism there was back when, most of the economy was factory based. So it's probably like the modern office worker, the knowledge worker, right? Which is probably this idea of professionalism came from. So that was back in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, that whole transformation period. And I wonder, again, was it something intentional where it was like, okay, we want to keep, Jews, blacks, and gays out of our workplace, right? And of course, other, and immigrants and all these people. We want to keep them out of our workplace, but how do we do that? Well, here, how about this? How about we create this structure called professionalism that we know they're going to have a hard time matching to because it's just our normal way of doing things that we'll have an easy time aligning to, they'll have a hard time aligning to, and we'll make that the standard. And then we can just exclude people because they don't meet that standard. But really, it was intentionally designed to keep people out all along, right? I'm just wondering, was professionalism designed to keep people out? Like from its very inception, these ideas, these concepts, were they discriminatory from the very beginning to keep immigrants out, to keep gays out, right? Or did it maybe just arise naturally out of an unjust society, but no one intended it to be exclusionary? I don't know.
Yeah, no, I've felt that it has been something that has been developed for that purpose. Because when you think about it, it's kind of like the way, even when we draw lines for like cities and states and everything, and how they give the funding to some areas and not the other areas, or, there's a lot of red lines in like how that's been made. And that was definitely by design. That was not a mistake or just something that came up out of nowhere. So I do feel like that was how it started in the beginning. And then, now they probably developed those workforce laws where you have to have a certain percentage of, people of color. And so now it's like, okay, now so that companies can make sure they're in line with that law, they've got to make sure they keep a certain percentage of people on staff of color. And so, I do believe that that was probably by design because they had to come in with a law to adjust that, It's insane, but it's our reality.
There's a lot of areas like that, right? Things that were put in place by design to have racially unequal outcomes, right? Or even, class and race, those two intersect. So even, class-based unequal outcomes. And nowadays, maybe they aren't necessarily upheld with any malicious intent, but like they're still there, right? So, the decision to fund schools with property taxes, there's a lot of mother effing ways you can fund schools. Why did you choose to fund schools with property taxes, if not to maintain the loop and keep people trapped in poverty and keep some people, on the top of the totem pole, right? Like, come on. Or even you look at like, differences of mandatory sentencing between different types of drugs based on what demographics typically use those drugs. Again, these days, a judge who gives a ruling on crack cocaine versus powder cocaine may just be following the rules, nothing malicious, but like that rule started maliciously. So it makes me wonder if the same thing happened with professionalism, right? The people who keep up the standards of professionalism today, maybe not doing it maliciously, but I wonder if when those codes of conduct, those norms were first established, if they were established maliciously. Again, no way of knowing. I mean, maybe there's a way of knowing. I sure as hell don't know, but it just makes me wonder.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
Wow, that's crazy. Jimmy here said that for the longest time he didn't have a picture on LinkedIn just because he was afraid he wouldn't be taken seriously. Like, God damn it. Islam here, right, said something similar about his name is probably what's holding him back, making it hard to get jobs, despite the fact having 2 masters. Like, God damn it. Again, this whole idea of professionalism isn't helping anyone. I mean, maybe it's helping people look like me or named John. Maybe it's helping us, but for the rest of the world, it's not helping. But I would even argue even folks like who aren't necessarily directly getting the short end of the stick on this, right? So folks like myself, I think indirectly it's still suffering, right? I mentioned that, in a lot of ways, having this culture of like, you have to adhere to the norm to be professional, it doesn't help many people because even folks that we don't traditionally consider minorities, right? So white folks like myself, right? Straight folks like myself, there's still aspects of ourselves, our beings, our personality, our background, our identity that don't fit that norm. There's very few people who fit perfectly inside that norm. So I would say everyone suffers to an extent, right? It's one of those systems that maybe was set up to disproportionately affect minority groups and marginalized groups, but it's actually not helping anyone. Even folks like myself who don't recognize that we're being hurt by it, I think are being hurt by this, right? Like nobody wins in this system of professionalism. And again, I think it has strong roots of heteronormative white supremacy tied into this idea of professionalism.
Absolutely, absolutely. I could not agree more. And it's kind of like with, the ageism thing, like we mentioned, or the tattoo things, like you mentioned. There's so many ways that people have to change something about themselves to be accepted or respected or let into a certain environment, and so it does affect everyone, even if it's on a different scale, a different level. There are levels to it, but it does affect everyone in some kind of way. So that's why it's so important for, I feel like companies to really create the environment and the culture that allows people to show up as their authentic selves. It's more than just having a value in your, your employee handbook. It's more than just, saying that it's okay, but it's really, what are you doing to invite that and incite that in people, to just let them know, hey, you're welcome to be yourself here. This is a judgment-free place. We're a professional place as well, but you are respected, you are accepted, and we're all here to work towards the same goal. So let's do it together, So I agree. Mm-hmm.
That's crazy. So I want to go on that point about like, how do you make it a workplace that's actually right, inclusive and stuff. But first, some of these comments from Jamie just need to be recognized.
Yeah, I was looking.
Career lady worked with pulled him aside, let him know that his hair was too gangster for the workplace.
Mm-hmm.
And you should consider like, I don't know what the fuck gangster hair is anyways.
And exactly, like, that's the question. What is that?
In there or something? What the hell is gangster hair?
That's what I'm saying. It's like, it's his natural hair. It is the hair that he was born with, and he's styling it in a way that is perfectly acceptable. But someone, labels it as being something that it's not. And so now it's gangster. It's not professional. It's not for the workplace. It's criminal. Like, how do you label something like that about someone and give it that type of connotation? Like, it's not possible. So why are you doing it? Like, So yeah, and that experience is, I think there was someone at the top even who mentioned like wearing wigs to interviews. Shayla, she used to have to wear wigs to interviews and even felt like she had to wear wigs at work. I agree with you, Shayla. I've been there. I completely understand, and happy to have you join us today as well. Yeah, so I mean, that's a real experience, and it's just something natural about yourself, your natural hair. Like, they try to say, oh, it's unkempt, so it's not professional. Oh, it's, dreads, so that's not professional, or it's braids, or it's just naturally a little afro, so it's not professional. But that's your God-given hair. So what are you saying? Now I have to change that so that I fit in here, so that you are more comfortable with my appearance? So you don't feel like it's gangster or criminal or unkempt, whatever the case may be. So it's crazy that those connotations and labels were added to something that is just genetically given to a person. So,
Well, and like there's not a lot of things I could do with my hair that would be considered unprofessional, right? Within reason. I guess like a 12-inch mohawk maybe, but like not anything I want to do is on the table, right? But not for folks like yourself and Jimmy, right? There's like a very small list of things you can do with your hair, most of which are not necessarily natural or easy.
Or cheap. It's usually expensive for women, to keep up with the European hairstyle, the European standard of the hairstyle, if you will. So
crazy. Here's something worth noting though. Jimmy mentioned that lady who said that to him wasn't white. So
wow.
Something that I have been noticing as I've educated myself more on topics involving race is that this whole system of, again, white preference and white normalcy and white belief in, white superiority, it's bred into our culture. So it honestly, in some small ways, I think, affects everyone. Even people of color have some part of this affecting their thinking, right? To the point where even someone who's not white can look at ethnic hair and be intimidated by it and think of it as gangster, right? Yeah. Even someone who's not white, when they see a black male and something about their appearance is off, the first word that pops to their mind isn't unkempt, unclean. The first word that pops to their mind is gangster. Like, why is that the first word that pops to your mind?
Exactly. I think you're absolutely right. It's like people can be programmed in the way that they think. So it's like, a lot of things these days are determined by a society standard. So if society says it's okay, it's okay. If society says it's not okay, it's not okay. And if you're constantly being exposed to that, there's like a programming that can take place in your own mind where now you are adopting those same standards to yourself. And so then when you look at other people, you're looking at them through that same lens. And, that's why it can be a subconscious act. Even that in that case can be, and it's something that you have to make a very conscious effort to get out of, to shed that thinking, to question that thinking, to bring light to, okay, what is this really about? And how can I make sure that what I'm doing is not in line with like some type of white supremacy thought process, or just a society standard that, was made by who knows, but just something that we all go by, but we don't really have a good reason for that, to make sure that my thinking is not in line with that, but in line with, the reality of the world we live in, and acceptance and tolerance and respect. So, yeah.
Well, and one thing that I really wish would change, and I'm doing every bit I can, right, my own to change, is when I'm talking about race and racism and stuff, at least I, for the majority of my life, was raised in this kind of understanding that the enemy, the bad guys, the thing to fix was racist white people. It was white people wearing Confederate flag t-shirts, shouting the N-word, and throwing rocks at black people when they drove by, right? Like racism, hatred, anger, violence, like that was the only enemy. And of course that shit's bad and that's an enemy too, but like that is only, I would say, a symptom of, again, a system of white preference, white normalcy, white superiority, white supremacy that has been baked into this country that, again, I think affects all of us to some extent. Obviously, affects white people more because when we're blind to it. But I would argue everyone living in a culture like that has some impact to their thinking and their biases and their thought process because of this white supremacist system. So that never gets talked about as the real enemy, right? The enemy is, again, racist white people, hateful, angry white people who do terrible, awful, violent things. And like, that's just a symptom of the real freaking problem here.
Exactly.
But it distracts from the problem,
Yeah. And to that point, because it does distract, because it's a visual representation. Oh, the rebel flags waving, all of that going on, it's very visual. But there's a system behind everything in America, like what you mentioned, that allows that mentality to be perpetuated and keep going. It's like being continued through the system. And so it doesn't look the same. You know what I mean? It looks a lot more hidden sometimes, or it looks a lot more normally like blending in, versus like someone just waving a rebel flag and shouting the N-word. But it's all a part of that same system. So people will attack the visual because they can see it. It's something that is tangible to them. But within that system, there's so many layers, like you mentioned, and to break those down would honestly take a lot of self-reflection, honesty, delving into the history, and being honest about that history, and then going forward, thinking about the actions that you're going to take to get rid of those things, and to make sure that this type of thing isn't somehow inculcated into another process or system again. So it would take a great effort, but it's the real root of the problem, like you mentioned.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to get pulled off too much into that topic. That's a different episode altogether. So as far as, again, the core topic of code switching here, one thing that you brought up is that to all sorts of companies on their come join our team website page talk about an inclusive work environment and bringing your whole self to work as a buzzword, and everyone knows how to say these things. And I would say most companies do say these things, but of course, as any member of marginalized group knows, there's a boatload of companies out there where you can't actually bring your whole self to work. In fact, I would say the majority of companies, you can't bring your whole self to work. So how do we go about actually creating workplaces where people can bring their whole selves to work, right? Where the, inclusion and belonging, right, part of DEIB actually happen? What's that look like? How do you do that?
Yes. So as you mentioned, it's more than just posting it on the website and saying it for legal reasons. It's a culture that should be inculcated by the leadership. It should foster conversations kind of like the one we're having, and like the one I had with Lyra with our intentional conversations. Having the room to bring a spotlight onto these things that a lot of people might not know about, to be educated about them, to get a better understanding, and then to walk away with a better understanding of how to be allies, how to, or if you're a part of it, how to get out of the subconscious act, or how to feel like you can bring your full self. So it's something that, there has to be an action to it. It can't just be like, yeah, we accept everyone here. It has to be room for the conversations, room for a better understanding, and to grow and to educate yourself and your team. So I feel like, that's something that definitely starts with management. It definitely starts with someone saying, hey, we understand that these issues exist. We want to make room to have these conversations. We want to make room to discuss how we can do better. And, that could even be like, for example, with the feedback on how to do better, having surveys and actually reviewing them and talking about them in a team meeting, discussing things that were brought up anonymously and coming up with ways to implement strategies to correct those things, or to kind of resolve issues that might be there based on whatever they find out. So I feel like, it has to be something that management takes the lead on and, brings that company through into the light, if you will, out of the darkness into the light, and helps people to have a better understanding and a fuller education and able to be allies to others. Yeah.
So, company culture is a terribly hard thing to pin down, even to influence, especially, with a larger organization. I imagine one difference between your previous experiences in the banking industry and your experiences now at Lyra is like the people there are probably different types of people on average, right? However, I'm wondering, is there anything else you can spot as a difference? Are there any structural differences to how Lyra does things, right? Anything you could witness from the outside and point to and say, hey, that's different about Lyra, and that led to a more inclusive and belonging type environment?
Yeah, I'd say one of our values is to show your cards, which basically means having things out in the open, having those discussions for the entire organization. Sorry, getting tongue twisted there. And basically, that's in everything we do, from like the finances of the company, the structure of the company, where the company is going. But then it's also in the things we have, like internal or intentional conversations, where we try to have like more education around DEIB initiatives, BIPOC, and all those things. So I think having that visibility into the company is something that a lot of other places did not have. A lot of the decisions were made closed door in a room with certain people, and then they came out and gave you whatever information they had decided upon. While with Lyra, it's definitely more of a process of getting insight and opinions from other people in the company and how they feel about things. And then it's just being completely open about all of that, and having meetings about those things so that no one is in the dark about, what initiatives they're considering or what they're pursuing. And it really keeps everyone on a level playing field, I feel, which further encourages that like openness about being yourself. And, you feel like everything about the company is very much an open book, and it helps you be open as well, like personally.
Something folks mentioned in the comments, right, towards that end of how do you make an environment with more inclusion and belonging is more diverse leadership, right, representation. Once there's more representation at the top, right, the culture will shift more favorably. And I think that's huge. And I think this is a good time to bring something up, which I wasn't intending to bring up here, but it's been rattling around in my head. So I know a ton of white people who have done really well in their careers, leaders, business owners, people in the top of their game. And when you ask them about like, well, how did you get there? Most of them say, well, it was this mentor that really took me from where I was kind of stuck, and really opened the door for me, whether that was through teaching, training, advice, or even whether it's through like straight up opening doors of opportunity for them to prove themselves. But there are so many successful white people out there who point to a moment in their past where they had a mentor come alongside them, and that was what allowed them to succeed. And I've read statistics somewhere, I'm sure that wouldn't be too hard to find, that people of color very rarely find that mentorship in the corporate workspace, right?
Yes.
So therefore, they have a lot less opportunity to get to the top, right? To the point where there is, in fact, more diversity at the top. And actually, we mentioned earlier in this conversation that, when you are code switching, it drains a lot of your mental, emotional energy. So you have less mental, emotional energy to put towards your work. You'll actually probably do not as good work, right? We theorize that may have been part of the reason that Larry didn't have the same sales numbers that some of us did, right? Could have been part of the factor. So again, we're in this situation. And again, gosh darn this system doesn't even necessarily require hateful, angry, racist white people to work, right? Like you can have well-intentioned, kind people, and the system still keeps people of color and other marginalized communities, right? I don't want to, forget the marginalized groups like the disabled, neuroatypical people, or neurodivergent people. But like, yeah, you don't get access to mentorship, right? You have to code switch, so it drains you of your mental, emotional energy, right? There's just so many barriers that mean you actually may end up doing worse quality of work because of all these barriers, and then therefore not get, access to leadership again. They don't necessarily even have to say, we refuse to hire Black people in leadership roles. That's not required, right? To keep this stratified the way it is.
Exactly.
It's so well designed, right?
Yeah,
who the hell came up with this?
Compartmentalized. Yeah, it's very compartmentalized. So it's like you mentioned, it doesn't have to be someone standing there saying this isn't going to happen. It's been built so strategically that it's honestly can run itself if you don't like actively work against it. If you don't actively try to break it down, decompartmentalize it, delve into the issues, and then try to take action against those issues, it can totally run by itself. So, I mean, that's why it's such a big deal.
Yeah. I'm reminded of a training. There's a company, a consulting company called Winning by Design. Great company, helped one of the companies I used to work with, and they taught about like how to double your revenue, right? And the point they were making was that you don't actually have to do anything crazy to double your revenue. You just have to go from leads generated 10% increase to convert, or traffic to the website 10% increase, and then fill out the form 10% increase, meetings booked 10% increase. And if every step of the pipeline, right, if you got a 10-stage pipeline, if every step along the way you do a 10% improvement, you can have doubled revenue, and you only ever improved one area 10%. So similarly, the way I look at this a lot of times when it comes to excluding members of marginalized groups is that you don't have to have this massive unovercomable obstacle called, no blacks allowed to keep someone out. If you just give them a 10% disadvantage at every step of the way, 10% disadvantage through a 12-cycle process, suddenly, you've got, leaders of Fortune 500 companies being 99% white men without any exclusionary policy. Just because they had that little advantage at every step along a complex chain. So if you look at any one piece of that, you'd be like, yeah, it's not perfect, but come on, like it's close to fair, right? But again, you stack them all together, and you got an almost insurmountable obstacle,
Exactly.
So yeah, I guess, let's kind of wrap up on just a little bit more about like, how do we do better? Let's start with this. On an individual level, let's say you're a person who's not a member of a marginalized group, and you notice that members of that particular marginalized group are code switching, and you suspect they're code switching, right? So maybe you're heterosexual and you notice that all the homosexual people in your office seem to be doing a lot of code switching. Maybe you're white, you notice racial minorities are code switching. Is there anything you can do as an individual? I'll just put this in my context. Is there anything I can do as an individual to make that workplace environment safer so that people don't have to code switch, or is it out of my hands?
I would say you absolutely can do something by being an ally. So it could even just be having that conversation of like, hey, what could I do to make this a more welcoming environment for you? What could I do to make you coming to work feel a little bit less challenging, a little bit more like you're accepted and you're respected here? What can I do for you? And then, taking that information and then using action towards it. And if there's ever like a capability to like, have some feedback for the company, or if you have like a leadership and you can like meet with some leadership, bringing out points anonymously and just saying that, this is how some people are feeling. What can we do about this to make this more welcoming? What can we do about this to make everyone feel respected and like they can be themselves here and they're accepted? But yeah, it definitely starts with being an ally. It definitely starts with just saying, hey, I want you to feel welcome here. I want you to feel respected here. What can I do? And then just like, we'll probably just sit there in a moment of shock, like, wow, okay. Like, oh, they approached me. They're asking me how they can like help me feel more welcome in the workplace. We'll probably be a little bit shocked for a minute, but we'll definitely have some feedback for sure that could help. So yeah, I think it's just, taking that step and saying, hey, how can I be an ally for you? And then going from there.
I'm going to share something with you that I've heard and see what your response is. So I've heard in the past, right, when people are talking about how to be a good ally, is that in general, it's not a good idea to put the burden of figuring out a solution on the shoulders of the member of the marginalized group, right? Come to them with suggested solutions. Don't come to them saying, what do you want me to do? Because their reaction is like, I don't fucking know. I got my own shit to deal with. But I don't know I don't know this system well enough to know how to fix it and to know what person like you should do. So I don't know. That's an alternate perspective. Do you have anything to say to that?
I will say I can understand where that comes from, because you don't want to make it seem like, okay, I'm trying to get you to come up with a solution to a problem you're experiencing. But it's more of just saying, on a personal level, like, hey, I'm here for you. What can I do? Like, what action can I take on my part to make this better for you? Versus just saying, hey, I know this is a problem. I don't know what to do with it. So you tell me, like, all the things I need to do to make it better. But it's just saying, like, on a personal 1-to-1 ratio, like, because obviously if it's not, taking place at the company level, or you don't have that type of power to do something at the company level, being an ally on that 1-to-1 ratio is really just having that kindness, compassion, letting people know that you're there for them, and then saying that, I want to be an ally. I want to do this. So how can I do this? How can I do that? And then absolutely looking at resources is great. There are a few articles out there about code switching in the workplace. So, coming and having an understanding of that is great. but really just leaving it open, I feel, to let people know how you can help them on that one-to-one is also helpful. So it's not like, okay, I'm assuming that this is what, I can do for this person to make them feel a certain type of way or feel better.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'll share something with you that's been kicking around my head just to get your individual perspective on it. Obviously, you can't speak for all members of various marginalized groups, but here's your perspective. One of the thoughts I've had in the past is that I've identified that oftentimes members of marginalized groups are put in a difficult situation where they'll notice things going on, right? Microaggressions, problematic behavior, actions, statements, words, whatever. They'll notice things, right? And they'll have to choose between just say nothing, get along, play nice, because it's what's best for your career and what's best for making friends and politics and all that, or take a stand, speak up and say, hey, that thing you said in the meeting, that's not okay. Or the way this was handled is not okay. And kind of stick their neck out and risk getting labeled as, the gay guy who won't stop talking about, oppression, or the angry Black woman, or whatever, kind of label people or members of marginalized groups get. And that's a tough choice, right? On the one hand, it's like, do what's best for my career and just sit down and stay quiet. Or on the other hand, do what's best for the rest of the world and speak up against this oppression. And I really wish they didn't have to make that choice. And I'm always willing to be the person to stick my neck out there, risk my social capital and reputation, and say, hey, what happened to that meeting was not okay. Now, sometimes I'll notice this stuff and I'll take that opportunity to do that, right? And just speak right up and say, hey, this isn't okay. But of course, I can't be everywhere at all times. And truthfully, I don't have a sense of an antenna for this stuff, right? Not being the victim of it, I might miss it. So I always want, like when I recognize there's someone in my workplace who is a member of the marginalized community, I always want to reach out and let them know, hey, by the way, if you ever see anything go down that's an issue and you don't really feel in the mood to speak up about it and be the squeaky wheel, pass it along to me. I'm willing to stick my neck out and be the squeaky wheel. But I'm not sure how that'll be perceived, right? Especially if I don't know this person, right? So I'm curious from your perspective, right? If some random ass white guy you've never met before slacks you and says, hey, if something happens, I'll speak up on your behalf. Would that be appreciated? Would you be like, shut up, sit down, I can speak for myself. Who the fuck are you? Like, I'm just curious. How would that come across?
I think on a personal level for me, I would appreciate the allyship. Now, if I wanted to speak up for myself, I'd let you know, like, thank you, but I'll probably speak up for myself on this one. But I think just letting them know that you're there as an ally, like, or having someone let me know that they're there for me as an ally is nice. And I feel like, yeah, it is one of those things where, hey, see something, say something. I feel like, especially, just as a person of color, if I'm saying it, I'm like, yeah, I feel like, this is going on. They might not see much value in it if I take that to management. But if someone else who looks like them, sounds like them, goes to them and says, hey, I'm noticing this, I don't like this, and I'm sure that this is affecting the team, they'll definitely probably take it more seriously. So I appreciate allyship. And I think that it's a joint force. It has to be like a force where everyone joins together against the problem. It can't just be me over here bringing it out or just you over there. It really needs to be everyone coming together against those issues to make it work and to make it recognize and to incite that change,
Yeah. Cool. Well, thanks so much for this conversation. I noticed now we're up on time. Yeah. It flew by.
I know. I've been enjoying it so much.
Well, we certainly got a little bit off topic at some points, but look, everything's so interconnected, right? It feels like you can't talk about coaching without talking about the white supremacist roots of, yes, of professionalism, right? And the heteronormative roots of professionalism and all that. So yeah, thanks for this conversation. I've certainly learned out. Like I said, I came into this conversation not even really having a good grasp on what you could call code switching, what it was and what it wasn't. So you certainly helped educate me and hopefully, our listeners as well.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. And I just want to say you can find me here on LinkedIn, and all my social handles are at Brave Sexy Strong. And I'm actually going to be starting a podcast for female empowerment called Brave Sexy Strong, coming soon on Clubhouse. So feel free to follow me everywhere. And yeah, thank you again for having me, John. It's been great.
Fantastic. I would love to follow you on Clubhouse. Thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely. Yeah. If you're not on there, I'll send you an invite for sure.
All right. Perfect. Thanks.
Bye.